Good morning, Scott here, known as Cantaloupe to some online, and I'm bringing another video to you on a subject that's interesting to me. It might be of interest to you or someone you know. I want to talk a little bit about some problems that arise in behavior when people are sexually abused. Trigger warning, in this video, there might be some candid comments about things that if you have experienced sexual abuse or trauma, you might be sensitive to it. So I want to talk also about a real experience that I just had today, and it may or may not be connected, but I'm going to tie it all together hopefully by the end of the video in a meaningful way. So to get into it, unfortunately, lots of people end up experiencing sexual trauma, sexual abuse at the hands of people who they should be able to trust, who they are forced to depend on because they happen to be, sharing a living space for whatever reasons. And this happens constantly. It's a big, huge problem. In fact, I would say the biggest problem is domestic abuse in general, which includes sexual abuse. But that's just my opinion. That part's my opinion. But I think that women especially are vulnerable to this, but by no means have a monopoly on being sexually abused. Children and women, especially and young women, are very frequently led to do things that they wouldn't necessarily choose to do. And it's a difficult situation because there is also a form of natural human behavior that is adjacent to exploitation. Sometimes there's a fine line, and the question of whether or not something was proper hinges on, the actual activity in question. Obviously, being present isn't necessarily abusive, but if the intent was to be present with the condition of staring at somebody, that can cross a line. The spirit of an action defines it. I'm going to say that again. The spirit, the motive, the reason for an action defines the nature of it, as well as the outcome, as well as especially if there is any kind of damage, emotional damage, trauma, or a violation of property or physical space. That's the definition of a crime. So I want to talk about, I'll come back to this. I'll circle back to this in a second. Something that happened just this morning. There's an individual, I don't need to go into great detail, but I have seen a person hanging around lately who is struggling with some mental health problems. And it's pretty obvious. I don't think I'm off the mark by saying that. And this person has in their mind, apparently I've talked to them a few times, that's how I know this, they have in their mind this idea that it's bad to accept support. And they are living outdoors, which isn't by itself necessarily a problem, but it is if your quality of life is below a certain point, an objective point where, you're not able to take care of yourself, you're suffering unduly and not being clean or sanitary. And this person is unfortunately experiencing this stuff. So I've talked to them a few times, and the reaction I got was to the effect that they are following a set of rules. I wouldn't imagine what the reasons are. I wouldn't presume to know, but they're trying to act a certain way logically. In their head, it's logical. They're saying, well, I'm not going to accept help or support or gratuity or anything like that because it can only hurt me. It's just that simple. But connected to that is a bigger idea, a bigger rule, if you will, where you should never be ridiculous. The rules make sense within a system, and outside of the system, there are no rules. So what that means is that you should always start with the premise that upon doing a reality check, if the rules aren't working, there's a bigger problem. And it's good to follow the rules until they drive you out of productivity and health and happiness. I think that not being ridiculous and being healthy and happy, regardless of what rules you're following, should be the absolute highest priorities at all times. But that's just me. So anyway, I gave this lady a Christmas present. It was just a couple dollar like plastic candy cane with some Hershey's Kisses. I said, Merry Christmas. I made a comment about maybe don't be ridiculous, and she threw it at me. So there you have it. But I don't know this person's story. I don't need to know it. I don't want to know it. But many people like her have experienced some kind of abuse. I'm not trying to, rush to judgment in her case, or even, make it my business. It's not my business, but it can happen. This kind of behavior where people become, paranoid and ridiculous can happen as a result of trauma. It has a way of worming into your behavior and making you think and do things that don't make a lot of sense to other people. It can happen. But connected to the original idea, abuse and sexual abuse in particular of young people, my feeling, from what I've heard women say, I've had several girlfriends. I'm not trying to brag. I'm just saying throughout the years I've dated people seriously and a little bit less seriously off and on, and I have heard many things from women themselves directly about the experiences of growing up, being young. And here's the trigger warning: sucking dick, excuse me, but they're made to do that a lot. I've heard men actually say that they expect it, and I enjoy a blowjob like the next guy, but I never ever ask for one. I never seek it out. I never influence the situation. If something's going to happen naturally between me and a consenting partner, that's one thing, but it's not an expectation. I have zero expectations, it turns out, in romance. If she wants to leave, and up to and including exiting forever, she's free to do that. As far as I'm concerned, that's the only proper way to love someone. Set them free first. Very first thing should be to show them the exit and say, hey, if you still feel like being here, it might be right. Let's find out. But I'm not going to say you got to do all this stuff. I don't expect it. It's not required. And some guys don't feel that way. And it's really sad, because my feeling is that from these women, as evidence, they cannot even enjoy, tapioca pudding, for example, or mayonnaise. They just avoid, whipped cream. They just hate all this stuff because it has an effect. When they feel obligated to do that thing, and especially when it's mixed up with their survival, that has a really bad effect on your mind. Okay, and I'm not saying that I know anybody in particular who is experiencing these specific problems, but it's very common, and I know this from experience, from talking to people. So I guess what I'm trying to say with this is, it's easy to get worked up, especially if you're a person who has experienced this stuff, to kind of mentally blow things out of proportion and to see villains everywhere. You start to see the worst in people if you have unprocessed trauma. And I don't want to call anybody out. I keep getting this reflex to mention people, but I don't want to do that. A lot of people, unfortunately, they'll assume that you're an abuser before they give you the benefit of the doubt, before they give you that vote of confidence. And that just takes everybody down. It amounts to a witch hunt when a lot of people get together and start, hunting for witches, whatever your witch looks like. If it's a pedophile, if it's a misogynist, if it's somebody who just thinks and believes differently than you do, or maybe they look different, or maybe they're not from where you're from. I mean, these are all the same ideas. It's called prejudice. It's called prejudice. When you assume somebody's guilty before they have had a chance to defend themselves, before they have had a chance to explain, if you think you know something about somebody, it doesn't matter how right you think you are. There's something called due process, and I keep mentioning this, whether it's between individuals or in a big official criminal sense. Due process is very important. And it's the fine line between giving someone a vote of confidence that you deserve yourself, or being a witch hunter. Maybe you want to be a witch hunter, but don't cry to me when you find yourself on a post, because that's how that goes. The road to getting tied to a post and burned at the stake is very shorter than you think. So anyway, I don't want to end on that note. The positive note here is that trauma can be resolved, and sometimes it takes talking to people, trusting people. I don't want to suggest therapy if it's not your thing. It can work. I think that some people have found success in that. I think that also, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, psychedelic mushrooms have actually been proven at this point in psychological and medical journals to be effective in treating trauma and depression. And I'm not entirely sure how that works, but I've read about it multiple times, so I just want to mention that. But being healthy and happy should be the goal. Final summary: giving people a vote of confidence, especially before there's any kind of substantial reason to think otherwise. If you just heard a rumor, or if you thought maybe you saw something, maybe mind your business until there's a real problem. Maybe mind your business and don't get all worked up before there's a real problem, because there's also something called bait. There's also something called people trolling you, and you don't want to fall into that trap. Trust me, that makes you look bad. Some people will just exploit you for trying to exploit them first. And turnabout is fair play sometimes, as they say. Reach out if you like with questions or comments to whitehotrobot@gmail.com. Thank you.